Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome again to another episodes. Should we call it episodes, Nathan? Not sure. To another event here for Twali. We have here today Nathan Adams to discuss about his journey from being an architect to becoming an XR designer. Hi, Nathan. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Indeed, and Nathan is like a veteran, I would say, for Tvori. Started using it years ago, and we're gonna hear a little bit of that story, of course. Maybe before I start, as usual, I would like to remind everybody to actually ask questions, participate, because we would like to keep this as interactive as possible. So interrupt us, drop in with any sorts of doubts or let's say curiosity that might spark our conversation. Um, but nonetheless, Nathan, I mean, I've quite some things to ask you, but let's keep it this flowy. So the first thing was, tell us a little bit about your life, your previous life as an architect, right? How was it?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in Los Angeles. That's where I'm from. And I studied architecture as an undergraduate and eventually went on and worked at a couple architecture firms. And actually, it was at one of the architecture firms I was working at where I started. They were actually designing Oculus's office spaces in Seattle, Washington. And we were using VR as a tool to quickly iterate and move walls and design in three-dimensional space. And that was the first time post-graduate graduation that I had ever really dove into virtual reality. And I thought, what an amazing tool this is. And I wanted to explore that a little bit further. So I went back to school, and the program I was in had an emphasis on emerging technologies like AR and VR. And I really took a deep dive and then actually pivoted after graduating and got a job at a technology company. And that was about 2 years ago, and here I am today.
So, I mean, how was that pivot, right? Because you have a certain skill set, and in terms of your probably your internship, the kind of education that you have got, and then all of a sudden, I mean, not all of a sudden, probably it was a process. This shift, you ended up designing for spatial interfaces. How was that transition from a skill set perspective?
For the most part, it felt very seamless. There was a lot of overlap in the fundamental design thinking that we learn in architecture school, and a lot of very similar fundamentals in UX. For example, I can speak to some of the things that architects obsess over and how they carry over to UX. So like an architect will spend an enormous amount of time trying to first understand their client and what their needs are, their quirks, their desires. I can give an example of this. There was a mid-century modernist architect named Richard Neutra, and he would actually give out a questionnaire to each client. And this questionnaire would ask questions, maybe it was 100 questions, and it would get so detailed to ask what time do they eat breakfast and what do they eat for breakfast. So you're really trying to paint a picture of and develop context before and really jumping into design. And I think in UX, it's a similar thing. We have to understand who our target audience is, what what are their habits, use cases, also iteration. Iteration is really important in architecture. The process usually begins with low fidelity concepting. And so for example, the architect might start with massing modeling. So this could be just a really simple massing on the site that represents orientation, scale, maybe overall, orientation, scale, and then once, I think overall composition. And so then once the architect has started to resolve that space, either in a physical model or in digital space, they'll begin to resolve that model a little bit more and bring it to a higher fidelity through another iteration. They might start adding materials, paint color, windows, walls. Walls will start to define the occupant's flow through the structure. And that is, I think very similar to designing for software. We have to think about how the user navigates an interface. We have to think about like how, especially in VR and 3D prototyping, we have to think about scale, legibility, and so on. And then of course, some of the other overlap between architecture and UX is going to be in just terms of development and engineering. So the architect will eventually hand off documentation, very pragmatic documentation, to a contractor, because the builder essentially needs to be able to recreate the architect's vision. And so that documentation might include dimensions, materials, detailing, scheduling, and so in UX, it's a very similar process I found, where once a lot of that concepting and prototyping has been done, as a UX designer, I will produce documentation and work directly with the development team to implement those ideas. So in a lot of ways, it was seamless,
right?
Because there is a lot of overlap, but of course.
But this actually brings me to the next question, and that is like, so there was this overlap. So what is that actually you had to learn that you say, oh shit, now this is very different. This is really gotta learn and try to study or go back or find other ways. What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that one more time?
So what was that instead you had to learn?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there was a lot. Working at an architecture office is a lot different than a technology studio. Just in terms of so many things, especially I think vocabulary and just, architects are concerned with construction documents, reflected ceiling plans, just there's a whole different lingo. And I think that to me was one of the most difficult parts, thinking about like moving into the technology studio and having terms like Scrum and Agile and sprint planning and just all of the other things.
So that was for the environment part, right? So you, of course, you get to experience a different word in a sense. So because you really are two completely different verticals. And from the design perspective, so when you look at designing a building, from designing a spatial experience, what is that you had to learn?
Yeah.
It could be tools, for example, that you were using maybe when you were an architect and you couldn't use the same when you were still were designing in 3D, or it could be anything else that you say, okay, now I really need to learn how, for example, interaction, because maybe as an architect you were more concerned about static object other than interact. I don't know. This is me babbling. It's just to just wondering if any of those were something that you had to catch up on.
Yeah, I think in terms of a lot of technical skills, there is still a lot of overlap. I think architects are equipped with a lot of a variety of tools that I found I used in a technology studio, especially a VR studio. A lot of 3D modeling was done. That I did a lot of 3D modeling as an architect, and then also in a technology studio. There was a lot of 3D modeling and then bringing that into a platform like Tabori to prototype. Yeah.
Okay. And did you discover that, in a way, what you were doing was somehow different from other people? So there was maybe another designer in the team, and he had a certain approach, and he was coming up with different results. Was your result in any way different? Not better, not worse, but different from him. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, within the office I was working at.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I really like about working in a technology studio, more than an architecture firm, is that there's such a wide variety of people with all types of backgrounds. So I was working with a lot of people that were or had been involved with game development, and they brought a lot of game theory into their designs. And so I think the combination and balance of someone like me who comes from kind of like a technical 3D background with someone who can think about game theory and sort of how to really capture and captivate a user along an experience, I think really balances out. Yeah. So I think, like, in terms of overall approach, a lot of the people I worked with really had different approaches to the way that they would design, but we would come together and kind of merge ideas, and the results were, I think, pretty great.
Yeah, that's interesting about like this idea of being complementary, right? So someone that has with a game background comes with someone that is more an animator comes with that, someone that is an architect brings something like this. Maybe would you say, I'm not sure how the market is at the moment, and maybe also a question to the people that are connected right now. Are people looking for that specific kind of skill set? So if you're a designer, then okay, I'm looking for someone who knows how to use Figma, knows how to use Adobe XD, know how to sketch, has done industrial design maybe, and those are really the profile, and it's a very strict selection on those parameters. Or the thing is, it's broader, it's wider. This is maybe to the people that are out there. Curious, how have you experienced that? But meanwhile, you get the time to answer the question maybe to Nathan is, what would you say to those people that are looking for designers, right? Because it feels like a risky move, right? I'm gonna get an architect. I don't know. This guy looks smart, but yeah, he's an architect. Are we sure about it? I mean, how could you convince them to be open-minded about it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For me, so I would say that in terms of like what people or what are the requirements right now in that I'm finding on job descriptions, it kind of varies, because I think this this is so new, especially VR and AR prototyping and UX. that the requirements haven't quite been defined.
Right.
And so every company is kind of defining their own requirements. And so I'm finding that a lot of companies will want to see or have Unity experience. Some companies don't care if you have Unity experience. They just want to see that you're capable of thinking spatially and you know some of the tools.
Right.
Some companies, they don't even, it's only under the preferred requirements that you can use 3D modeling software. Sometimes it's okay if you come from a UX background and you want traditional like 2D desktop and mobile, and you want to merge into three-dimensional UX. It's not always required that you know 3D modeling spatial platforms, but I think it does help. And I think a big piece of advice I would give to someone who wants to break into 3D spatial UX is just to dive into a platform like Tvori or like Google Blocks and just create something and just have fun. I think for me, I created a lot of side projects because I think when a company looks at an architect's profile, they're less interested in the architecture. They're more interested in the thinking behind the architecture. And so if, as an architect, if you're trying to break into UX, especially spatial UX, adding that UX lens to your projects will definitely help. And yeah.
I think that is it's very true, and it's good. I mean, it's also a good thing that maybe those requirements are not defined yet, because it still keeps innovation going in a place where there is already a lot that has to be done, right? That there is a lot of discovery. So we have some Luis Fernandez just mentioned this is so true. I think the US is ahead of Europe in that sense. So there are more VR related jobs here. Europe is still catching up. I think that might be very true. David Fung mentioned about VR overall technical game engines and 3D program, conceptual mental models, the ability to think spatial and be a maker, quick prototyper. So right, you start iterating and start creating stuff early, fast. There is a question from JP Stapleton. He asked, what would you say the VR equivalent of an architectural blueprint? What would be the equivalent?
Yeah, okay.
There is a question. It is actually a question. So what would be the equivalent, say the VR equivalent of an architectural blueprint?
Yeah, I think that's also very undefined at this point.
Right.
But I think it's a concept or prototype in a platform like Tvori that really starts to define the scale, the orientation, the composition, the user flow, and then from there, producing documentation. I think the combination of all of that would become the blueprint. But it's a good question, and there's definitely aren't any standards.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what are some of the tips that you would give to XR designers when approaching design? So what are some of the learnings throughout this journey that you would like to share so that people might get into this faster or might make better design?
Yeah, okay. I would say I think a lot of us designers, we want to be pixel perfect. And that's something that I've always struggled with. But I think as a UX designer, I think in any design field, it would benefit us all to not be too precious or too married to an idea. Definitely to prototype and test often, just to validate those ideas. And I think that that's something that I've always struggled with, because I tend to dive in and get too into the weeds too fast. And I think starting very broad and then zooming in is I think maybe
more effective.
Beneficial.
Yeah,
more effective. Yeah,
more effective. I was just today actually talking with a designer, and we were talking about Tori and say, hey, how can I do this? How can I do that? If I have a car, how can I make like the car moves? And I was like, look, are you sure you want to do that? Because you can do it, right? It is not a problem. But what is the purpose of this thing that you're making? Because of course you can spend years making something that is exactly like a very close representation to what the final product could be, right? And you probably have to add a lot of, for example, in Tvori, like a lot of keyframes, a lot of steps to refine the movement, to not look janky. But do you need that? Maybe a step animation is enough, right? You have one frame before, one frame after, and that could convey the idea. And then that's the moment that I think I have a hard time when especially with tools that allow you to do a lot of things. Just okay, but wait a second, let's step back. What is that I really want to do here, right? Is it worth to invest 3 hours, 4 hours into doing this in this way? And you realize that very often the answer is no, personally, because maybe it's something there and it's not something that's gonna be like the final thing. It's like, okay, you want to try this, you want to communicate this idea, and people will get it, and that's a prototype, right? So if you look at the balance between spending 20 minutes or 4 hours, that's heavy, right? I mean, there is a big trade-off. There is a question from Ashish Dubey. He asked, what VR application do you use the most for productivity and in general?
Yeah, I would say Tvori.
Okay.
Because so the company I was working at, we developed a relationship with Tvori maybe a couple of years ago, and throughout the time when I was working there, I would try to dive into Tvori, but there was a little bit of a learning curve, and we were moving so fast as a company that I kept reverting back to the tools that I know the best and I've used for the longest time. A lot of like 3D modeling tools, but static 3D modeling tools. And then now I have a little bit more time, so I've actually just taken a deep dive into Tvori and kind of explored the possibilities by coming up with just my own personal projects and using Tvori as a tool to create or represent those ideas. But yeah, I would say in terms of 3D prototyping, it's really just Tvori right now. Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's a good moment. Show us something. I mean, now you are luring us with this.
Okay.
We gave promises now. But indeed, so guys, keep the question coming. I think that's very nice to see you interacting and joining the conversation. Absolutely. So while Nathan set things up and share his screen.
All right, here we go. So
your screen is not shared at the moment.
Let's see. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Now it is.
Okay, so this was just a concept I had. The idea is there would be these memory orbs. It's an AR app idea, and these memory orbs you can weave around the city, and and come back to them in the future to see that moment. So it's all, I did everything in Tabori and then just post-processed
nice.
in After Effects. And yeah, so the idea is here, there was this memory that a mom and her son had in the park, and they're coming back to the park years later to relive that moment when her son was much smaller.
Right.
And then here's an engagement.
Oh, right.
A little cheesy, but
yeah. No, I can see that. Right. Right.
Yeah.
I really like the banner flying in the yes.
And this project really allowed
itself, the city itself. Was it something that you modeled separately, or how was that made?
Yeah, so I just found a kind of like a kit of parts on I think like CG Trader, and then brought that into a 3D modeling platform, and then just arranged those parts to how I liked them, and then exported all that, or just imported all that into Tabori.
Right.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It kind of gave me I was able to explore a lot of what Tabori offers, which I think a good amount. Yeah.
You know what is absolutely fascinating to me? It's the fact that when it's about prototyping, now, what were you actually prototyping? Was it VR? Was it AR? I mean, at the end, it was not even a specific thing, right? It was really about, there was a digital interface, there were human interactions, there was the environment. So at the end, that could have been something else. It could be, for example, a mobility experience, right? I mean, technically, with the same concept with an autonomous vehicles that open in a certain way. And then maybe there is the dashboard of the car where you can select something. So always what fascinates me is this prototype where it's not a prototype of an AR app. It's a prototype of a generally a broader experience. Because what I was thinking is, I think that in the future we are going to go in a direction where prototype will span across reality, right? So you have the real world, then you might have a digital interface, then maybe you have an augmented reality layer. So you will need to have tools that do not constrict you to one way of doing it. Because, for example, clay, it's great for physical object, but you cannot do it with others, right? A monitor, it's great for 2D interfaces, for sketching and so on, right? But yeah, maybe it's not that good, doesn't give that impression for VR or AR. So I think that when creating something like this, and potentially also being able to have others in that same space and show those different layers, a 2D app, an AR content, a space that plays around it, it's just so fascinating. And I think that is maybe too far ahead thinking, but I just, because if you would have the opportunity, for example, to get from Figma that 2D interface that you got for the mobile app, right? You could have pushed your prototype even further, right? Because you could also add that layer into it. It's just to me very, very fascinating. Well,
it's a really good point,
right? So and it blows my mind. You know, I'm sorry. It's just I think I imagine a moment where we will be able, okay, what do we do? Okay, we want to prototype a washing machine. Perfect. You get the 3D model of the washing machine. There is going to be a 2D interface that you get in Adobe XD, and then you link a behavior of the app to an actual response of the 3D model. For example, if you push this button, the door opens, right? Being able to do that so early at zero cost, because then there is zero cost, right? How much you could actually save, ideate, or come up with better idea or test in advance. To me, it's just, I don't know, it just blows my mind. But, oh wow, this is pretty nice. Oh my god, beautiful, this is so cool, really nice. Need to find a city model like that. This is really pretty and lovely work. Inga, seems like Nathan modeled the city from primitives and basic shapes in Tvori. Almost, Inga, almost. No, indeed, I think people love that.
Thanks, everyone. It was a lot of fun, and I think, I think my intentions was to show kind of a high level, like animation prototype of the general gist of this application, this memory orb application. But I think, like you were saying, Gabriele, is, what would be amazing is to be able to link or plug, have a link to like an Adobe XD or Figma template, and then be able to import that in, because as you could see, my interface designs were lacking, and it's kind of like you can only do so much, without spending a ton of time. Yeah. And so I think my intention was just to kind of show a high level, but it would be amazing to be able to dive more into the UI and the interface.
Maybe I can give you a tip there, because I don't know if you have noticed, some people miss it. Now in Tvori on PC, you can also import your own PDF, and the transition between PDF pages can also be animated. That means that
that's interesting.
Yes, so if you have, for example, a UI and you have a user journey, right, and you have maybe 5 or 6 steps about doing this, doing that, you can then animate that transition between the pages of the PDF, and it's much easier to then also get that in. Maybe something to experiment.
Good to know. Good to know.
Try it out. So maybe can you maybe wait? So how long? I have a question from Luis Fernandez. He asks, how long would it take to build the same in a more traditional desktop tool? So let's imagine you would do this, but it's on a 2D tool. How long would that take you?
Do the same thing, but using a more traditional desktop tool.
Yeah. So I imagine he's thinking about some Maya or maybe Blender or maybe Unity. So to create this kind of like 2D impression, how long would that take?
Yeah, I mean, for me, or
this is a very good point. This is a very good point, because we always disconnect time from who is doing something, right? So to you first, let's say, how long would it take?
Ooh, good question. I don't know. I mean, I would say something like that in Tvori. Maybe it took me, it's hard to say, maybe 20 hours or something. Okay. But if I were, maybe right around that. But if I were to try to recreate that using, I wouldn't really know how. I mean, I could use a platform like, it would take me longer. I'll just put it that way.
Yes.
I found Tvori to be super quick. And I think if I were to do this again, this exact same thing, it would take me half the time, because I was learning a lot of it as I was going. But yeah, I think Tvori is super fast. So I think in any other platform, it would take me much longer.
Yeah. And this is the point. We always disconnect time. Time is all relative. I mean, right? We ask, oh, can you do that in Unity? And someone has been using Unity for 10 years, and is pretty good. So yeah, of course, I mean, it's gonna take a couple days max. Yeah, but you cannot disconnect and just say, because time is so relative depending on the person, on the skill set, and I think that not all tools are for everybody, right? So when we also approach that are these kind of tools, and honestly, I don't even try to talk to developers because they will know, yeah, but I would rather do that in Unity. And I know, and you should, really, you should do it in Unity. But if you're a designer instead, you very likely might not have that skill set right off the box, right? I talk to so many that actually are they come from 2D, so they know they are very good at sketching, about with typography, with design systems, and so on, but they wouldn't know how to animate, and it is very, very, very daunting to start from scratch using Maya or using Blender. In 4 is much easier. I mean, if you want to wave, you grab your puppet and you wave, and that's about it, right? You might not even need anything else. Similar for moving the camera, it's pretty straightforward.
Also, 3D modeling. You know, I think someone who doesn't know 3D modeling can jump into Devori and learn that pretty quickly with some of the primitive objects, just scaling and you know, orienting and just, I think, building objects is super fast.
Right, indeed. So David Fung asks, you can have animation play live in a PDF. So what I mean by that is that if you point your camera at the specific PDF, you will see you can have the kind of like a slideshow, right, of that PDF captured by the camera, right? So if that slideshow is, for example, made to have a 2D app, right, it's kind of like in portrait mode, you have this PDF that is in portrait mode, you could technically do that. Just remember that on the camera you have to show the 3D UI. So you have to toggle the camera that needs to show the UI in the scene. But so what are then, based on your experience, what are the characteristics that you look in a design, in a prototyping tool? So you mentioned 40. Is that something that made you stick with that because it was about that you couldn't live without, or that was particularly important to you?
Yeah, I think it's important that a prototyping platform be intuitive, relatively easy to use. You know, I think it's important that it's easy. You could jump in and do things immediately, but then there are more advanced features that you could build up to.
Right.
You know, I think that's important. You know, because especially when you're working in an office that's moving fast. You know, I think if I could spend a fraction of the time producing a prototype that a Unity developer would spend producing that same prototype, then that's a valuable time spent. But if it's going to take me just as long, then they might as well just do it in Unity. And so,
right.
I think, you know, when looking at a prototyping platform, I think, yeah, ease of use is super important.
So, and with that layer of potentially going further, that's what you mentioned. So getting easy, but then it can be deep enough to allow me to do other things if I want to, in a way. Right.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, I think it's great that you can set up keyframes in Devori and you can create really complex animations.
Let's do one thing. Maybe why don't you show people, right? Because maybe it's sometimes to the people that are not familiar with it. Would you mind if you have, because I remember you had the headset laying around. Maybe we can see if we can set it up so we can give them an impression of how that looks.
Yeah, sure. Let me jump in.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And meanwhile, guys, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask, right?
Okay, let me know if you see what I see.
I see what I see. Can you just do one thing? Can you just click on display mode on the bottom right once, so that we get a less jittery? That's it. Close that menu with the arrow.
Okay.
That's it. Good to go.
Okay. Yeah, so this is that scene that I set up. And like I mentioned before, each individual, these were just little assets that I brought in. And then I configured all of this to create the city. And then into Vori, I went in and I started adding these lights. But let's see. We can zoom into this scene right here.
Right. That's the cinema one with the coupons flying, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so let's see. Do you have any specific questions for me?
Yeah, so indeed, maybe how, for example, show us the camera movement that you have picked for that specific scene, so that people can see maybe the camera, how it moves, and the animation path of that specific camera.
Sure. So what I ended up doing is I kind of spliced together multiple scenes. And so I have a few different cameras here. I have this camera right here. And this camera kind of drops into the scene.
Right.
And then, let's see. Okay, and so this camera, let's see, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know if it's, my scene might be a little bit. So I don't know how accurate this is actually right now. But what I could show is, I'll show you this camera.
Right.
So what ended in the video that you had just watched, there was a scene where the user is pinged, and they take out their phone because now they're in this like proximity of the cinema.
Right.
And so once they enter the proximity of the cinema, they get a ping, and they take out their phone, and now they're in AR mode, and they can look around and they can see like coupons.
Right.
And then I wanted to show that you can hold your phone up to a movie trailer poster and actually go into AR mode and see that trailer. So what I did is this camera right here represents the movement of that person.
Right. So you replace the person. So you use a first-person view. The camera is a first-person view.
Exactly. It's a first-person view. Yeah. And then what ends up happening as I get a little bit closer, or as this person or this camera gets closer, the person, I have this character set up here, and then that visibility of that person was hidden, and then they just turn on, and then as that camera moves into place,
right,
you can see their arm rate,
and the phone appearing. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. There is actually a question from JP Stapleton. How do you animate the people? Now, maybe, can you do something? I know that this is, can you just create maybe a new scene and show how a person can be animated in real time? Because maybe right now there is a lot going on. It might be hard to grasp with so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I will do my best.
Yeah. Maybe
okay.
Just create a new scene for a sec.
Oh, new scene. Okay.
Yeah, just
sure.
empty, so that maybe people don't get distracted by all the prettiness flying
sure.
around. Right.
Okay.
That's
so
it.
we have a new scene, and then I'm gonna take out the shell. I'm gonna go to characters, and I'll drop a character down. So there's a couple ways I found to animate, but one is, so here's the timeline right here. And so what we could do a real-time animation, which is super simple. You just select on the timeline, real time, and now we can actually just grab that person's
right.
arms and move them around. And now we can take the scrubber and go back to the beginning and play that animation. So this person looks like they're swimming. One thing that's a little bit more difficult for me, at least, is, let's take one more character out. So if I wanted to have this person walk, that is a little bit more difficult for me.
I do have a question here, right?
Go ahead.
That is, what is the value of, is there a lot of value in a walking cycle comparing to have, for example, these figures slide? No, because we go back to what we were just discussing, right? We were discussing about the cost of doing something like this and about designer trying to do something pretty. Again, here you can have a pretty sophisticated walk animation, right? Because you have joints, you have everything, you can have a lot of keyframes. But to you as a designer, you wanted to create something pretty and still you went through the process of making a walk animation. Does that add value? How much value does that add in comparison to how long it takes to make?
It's a really good point, and I think it really depends on the idea that you're trying to convey. But for me personally, what I found is that I started off by creating in the previous short animations that I showed, I had someone walking, and that took me a really long time to produce.
Right.
But I found at the end it wasn't even necessary, because that walking had nothing to do with the actual concept that I was trying to convey. And so I think as a designer, we have to get creative and be able to reduce time spent. It's all about just maximizing efficiency. And I think if you can convey the same idea
because maybe you can show how you add a couple of keyframe, right? You can auto key so that you give an impression to people what we are talking about, right?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if I wanted to have this person walk,
right?
I think I would start by hitting keyframe. I don't know if you could do it real time. I'm not sure. And then what I would do is I would select their hand or a body part. But let's go with their foot. And then I would add a keyframe. I would move the scrubber forward, and then lift a leg like this.
Right.
And then now you have, oops, I think I grabbed the wrong thing.
Yeah, the ground came with the floor.
Yeah, just gonna get rid of that.
I think okay,
it doesn't want to go, but let's go back. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Why don't let's start over.
remember now that you are in AutoKey, so yes, recording is still on.
That's right.
That was probably the culprit.
Okay, let's. I was in AutoKey. Okay, one more time. Here we go. Yeah, I'm still learning myself. I'm okay, so earlier we showed
right
real-time animation,
right.
and so now we'll show keyframe. Okay, so we have this figure, and what we could do is we could select AutoKey up here, and we can grab a foot.
Yeah. So while we do that, Luis is asking, what's the difference between real time and AutoKey? I can while you keep working. So in real time, you can actually move the object in space, and that is recorded. So the timing, the speed of your movement, it's all recorded. While instead, with AutoKey, you add a keyframe. Then you set the timing, you set another keyframe, and then there is interpolation between the two. So that is basically the difference. So the first one is also maybe more rough because it's just based on the controller and movement, while instead in the other case you can be very precise. You can really zoom in that timeline and do things more accurately. Yeah. So now you indeed you have added.
There we go. Okay. So
yeah. So that's the thing, right? I think that having a walk animation, it is because now, for example, I don't know if you have set the previous keyframe for the beginning pose for the feet.
Oops. I'm definitely not doing this correctly.
No, but indeed, so this is, and that is a perfect bridge to the reason why we have seen that a lot of designers have a hard time using animation to convey their ideas, right? I mean, and it totally makes total sense. So the point here is also that, and that is the reason why we are now investing in a different system for Quest, for our Quest.
I see.
Because in there we have a stage system. So you have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 that represent kind of frame, and you can more easily have a transition in between those. And I think that makes it much more accessible and much easier, even though you will not be able to get a walking cycle. You probably get, okay, the person is here, then the person is there, and you have to, let's say, close the gap in between, so to say.
Right. And I think, for at least UX prototyping, having someone walk is probably not needed. But I think doing something like, this.
Yeah, and like pushing a button or doing something else, that is certainly enough to convey a certain idea.
Right. Is there anything else I could show in here?
No, I think it's okay. I mean,
okay.
Maybe there is one thing. Wait, Nat, how can you enable that camera on top of the timeline? So if you go, maybe, I don't know what there is. Yeah, can you maybe snap that back, bring a camera so that you can show how to, that, and maybe bring a camera in so that, so by clicking that little icon that is close to the red cross on the right of the timeline, you will open that panel. Yes.
Right here?
No, I mean the green thing, right? So that you enable that panel.
Oh, yeah.
It's not automatically enabled. Yeah. So by clicking that, you get that panel. And then once you bring a camera in the scene, you will be able to see what the camera sees on that panel. Exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's great is even the cameras are, you can create an animation with camera. So you can have this camera move around a scene, zoom in, zoom out.
Yeah. Indeed. So thanks, Alan. Yes, because there was a question, so I wanted to show that.
Sure. I could show one more.
Oh yeah, please.
Scene that. Okay.
Oh yeah, I love that article. It was really nice, and how you made like a, technically that was even a 2D UI in 3D. That was
yeah. So here. What I wanted to do here is create almost like a shelf system that could show products in augmented reality, and then you could select those products and add those to the scene. And so what I ended up doing is I created this, let's see, this short animation that moves these objects back and forth. And then what I would do is, let's see. And so if this was the phone,
right,
you would be able to see those objects and be able to, interact and move those objects around.
Right. So in this case, the camera is representing a mobile phone.
Yeah, exactly. I think the ideas here aren't completely fleshed out, but it was another opportunity for me to dive in and explore Tavori.
I really like this concept. Also, like the change of color and saturation to convey like which item is being selected, and category of object based on vertical scroll, and instead the kind of object on a horizontal. Those are all concepts that are, let's say, part of the design idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. There was a few things that I wanted to do, like you mentioned, where you have this center object that's in full saturation and 100%, let's say, scale, and then as you scroll, as the user would scroll, that object, let's say it's the Nike shoe, it would decrease in scale and saturation, and then you get this feedback right here. It's like this portal.
Yeah. Yes, like bloop, like it's being swallowed.
Yeah.
By the portal.
Right. And this was just a super easy scene to set up. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. This looks very nice, and still, it's about a couple of ideas. Okay, what do I need to get out of this? I need to get this, and that, right? I mean, and that's enough.
Exactly, and in a scene like this, I don't need to show too much complicated human animation.
Right.
It's just maybe some scrolling. That's really it.
Indeed. So very nice. Love this. So I've also seen here are some of the comment. Indeed, Nathan. Thanks. This was really cool. The first time I saw the article, I was like, oh my god, I didn't know that the people were creating such amazing things. Sometimes like this surprise. Really. No,
thank you.
Nathan, I really want to thank you. Right, so we round up the hour, and is there maybe anything else that you would like to share with the people?
I would say, I guess if anything, if I can leave with, just feel empowered to just jump in and create. I think, the more time you spend just exploring and creating, keep it light, keep it fun, and then a lot of those, I think as a designer, we forget to be, we sometimes we're too pragmatic. So maybe take a step back, just dive into something like Tabori and just have fun, create something, and you'll learn from that creation. Yeah, I think.
And I think this is also like for anybody now that doesn't have maybe a VR ready PC or an Oculus Rift, I encourage you to actually subscribe to be a beta tester for Shapes. It's our new product, it's on Quest, it's collaborative, and it really nails what Nathan just said. It's about create as fast as possible, have fun, and join with others. We have a very nice Discord community. You can just hop in and say, hey guys, I want to create something, tag yourself as a collaborator, and then start joining with others just with like this, anywhere you want. And it's a different way of creating. So that being said, guys, I really want to thank you, but especially Nathan. It was a real pleasure to have you, also to show such a great concepts. And I mean, getting content with Nathan as well, because I think he has a lot to share, a lot of experience in this. So please don't hesitate to connect to him, and I suppose he's going to be pretty open to have a chat in case, or in general, explore opportunities.
Absolutely. Reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Gabriele, and thanks to everyone for joining in and being part of the discussion.
Indeed. So guys, thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye bye. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.